If you were to ask me what my most nostalgia-filled game was, it would probably be this one. Spyro: A Hero's Tale was the second game I ever played, and needless to say, I was excited to revisit it. Everyone on the internet also seemed really divided on Spyro: A Hero's Tale, with some people loving it, some despising it, and some just feeling indifferent about it. So now that I have played Spyro: A Hero's Tale 2 times, once for 100% completion and another for a more casual playthrough, what do I think of the game? Well, let's start out with the title. Yes, the title. I want you to take a good look at Spyro: A Hero's Tale and tell me what you see. Do you, by any chance, see that hilarious, original, dank pun in it? See, it's funny because you would expect it to be spelled T-A-L-E, not T-A-I-L. But it's goofy because Spyro is also a dragon who also has a T-A-I-L, who is going on a T-A-L-E. It's like poetry, they rhyme. Moving on from this title, let's begin with the actual game. Okay, does anyone else feel really uncomfortable watching this? I don't even know what the hell is going on, and I'm still frightened. There is no dialogue in this opening for whatever reason. The only thing you hear is this ominous loop of music. It seemed obvious to me that Spyro: A Hero's Tale was going for an edgier, darker tone by this opening scene. This red dragon named Red, yeah, real creative, looks like he's sucking life out of the world with his cronies, and everything looks bleak, but it's not. The very next scene is the side character from Spyro 2, the professor, and Spyro himself having a conversation about what just happened. It's two characters, one of which I could care less about, standing and talking in a room while the camera just cuts from 3 different perspectives. At least Enter the Dragonfly, yes, I'm about to compliment that atrocity, had a somewhat interesting intro regardless of how stupid, poorly paced, and visually ugly it was. Spyro: A Hero's Tale's opening could not be more straightforward and boring. And remember how I was talking about how it seemed the game was attempting to be really edgy and somber? Well, this part of the intro and the oddly cheery nature of the first area sort of counteract that. The jokes, the fourth wall breaking, and the weird dialogue pacing give the impression this game is going for a more lighthearted approach, which it does semi-successfully later on. But it serves as an oddly sharp contrast to this gloomy opening cutscene. Anyways, the whole premise of the plot is that Red, the red dragon, created these dark gems to suck the life out of the world. He also has employed the help of such memorable characters as Nasty Nork from Spyro 1, Ursula's aborted sister, Manny from Ice Age, and these 3 variants of Nork minions. So, you as Spyro the Jess Harnell voiced dragon must travel through the 4 realms and thwart Red's plan. Along the way, you'll also run into a cast of memorable NPCs and rebel animals like Otto the generic dude bro stoner, Phil the paranoid penguin, Tina the intoxicated hyena, or Tomas. Oh, and there are also other dragons in this world, but most of them can be summed up as Spyro OCs. For instance, Flame is a sunburned Spyro. He's literally Spyro, but with a different color palette. And don't even get me started on Spyro's love interest Ember. Although you only cross paths with her once or twice, her conversations with the aforementioned loverboy make me feel emotionally confused. The way she talks to Spyro is weirdly dirty. Hearing a pink dragon talk sensually to another dragon is something I simply never want to experience again. See, most of the characters are one-dimensional, which is fine, but the writing and dialogue leave a lot to be desired. I imagine when the writers were deciding on how they should make their cast of characters, they just chose a stereotype and molded it entire character around it. Like Otto is the stereotypical pot-smoking jabroni, Fredneck is the stereotypical dumb American redneck, Wally is the stereotypical war veteran, and so on. However, nothing encapsulates this more than the Dragon Elders. I kind of alluded to this before, but Spyro: A Hero's Tale loves to incorporate any bit of humor it can into its dialogue. And I have no clue if this is intentional, but just listen to this Dragon Elder and what exactly he's trying to teach Spyro.
Now, to pole spin, jump onto the pole. To swing over to the next pole or dismount, just jump. You can change direction on a pole simply by turning in the opposite direction.
I'm certainly not someone who gets offended or triggered, but come on, game designers! You could have at least been a bit more subtle with that joke. The stereotypically homosexual or female dragon is teaching Spyro pole dancing. This is one of the numerous times the humor in this game falls flat on its face. At one point, the professor starts referencing a bunch of MacGuffins from other more successful video game franchises, and he's trying to be comical because it's like, haha, I forgot the name of the thing, so here are other better things from other better games so we can be topical. Perhaps it's because I'm so cynical, but this scene didn't really resonate with me. Maybe if the professor had better video games to reference, like Jiggies from Banjo-Kazooie or something, then the joke would have been better, but I digress. The only thing I legitimately found funny about this game were the facial expressions, and I cannot, for the life of me, explain why. I watched all the cutscenes just the other day with my friend, and I couldn't stop laughing for some reason. The way some of these characters look is surprisingly hilarious. But going back to the writing, the other thing I can't stand is the constant, and I mean constant, breaking of the fourth wall.
The dragon.
Oh, a sea dragon. Got it.
Chicks.
To fulfill that precious humor quota, just about in every scene, Spyro will turn to the camera and say a wry quip that annoys me every single time. After my 2 playthroughs, I couldn't even get irritated at Spyro's witty remarks. I would just sigh and shake my head. Putting all those complaints aside though, the story certainly works and is pretty simple to follow. While there's a lot more story content here than in other games, I don't mind it. It's just the execution, writing, and humor that puts a damper on my experience. And I'm sure you've all noticed by now, but the presentation is pretty good. Visually, for a 6th generation console, Spyro: A Hero's Tale looks great. The more cartoonish and colorful art style is a welcome change from the drab atmosphere in Enter the Dragonfly. Not to mention, there's a wide array of level themes and worlds, so unlike past games, I always felt immersed and stimulated. Because of this diversity, the environments never felt boring to walk around in or explore in. Some worlds, like the icy wilderness, do look bleak and uninspired, but for the most part, realms like the Dragon Village, the coastal remains, and the cloudy domain have some fantastic aesthetics. That being said, the visuals are nothing mind-blowing or anything, and the game does suffer from a lot of pop-in, some frame rate issues, and weird NPC movement. Like when I do this minigame for Fredneck the Frog and he gives me a MacGuffin, his model changes and his body looks all contorted. In general, the character animations and models, for that matter, are subpar at best. Specifically, Sparks's, Otto's, and Blink's animations while idling and speaking look off. The same can be said for Moneybags, Red, and Neptune and Hunter. At least character models and enemy models look alright and are not abominations like the Enter the Dragonfly equivalents. Also, the lip syncing in this title has been significantly improved from past games. As for the sound design, it's also pretty good. The soundtrack is by far my favorite in the series. Even though a lot of the tracks are essentially remixes of the same musical phrase, I'm a huge fan of Steve Duckworth's style here. The addition of new instruments in the absence of the heavy emphasis on percussion makes Spyro: A Hero's Tale's OST sound unique. Pretty much all of the tracks are still catchy and upbeat, which is great. In addition to this, the voice acting is as decent can be. Sure, some performances can get on my nerves like Sparks's, but the actresses and actors did a stellar job with the material they had to work with. On the opposite side of the spectrum, the stock royalty-free sound effects can be really atmosphere-breaking and annoying. I'm sure you might not mind this as much as I did, but after 2 playthroughs and hearing the uninteresting, generic sound effects over and over, it gets kinda jarring. Now that we have all that out of the way, what about the gameplay? Well, the first thing that probably jumps out to you is the fact that Spyro: A Hero's Tale is a lot different from the previous installments. In the past, when you collected gems, there was a set number in every world, but now gems function more like rupees. Gems are more so a form of currency than a treasure as opposed to the gems in Spyro 1, 2, 3, and Enter the Dragonfly. In that sense, you would think gem collecting would be a waste of your time, right? Well, it depends on how you want to play this game. Moneybags has now been delegated to a shop that sells lockpicks to somewhat useless upgrades and a teleportation paper. It sells nothing else of value. And really, the only thing you need is the occasional lockpick, but if you're aspiring to get all the dragon eggs, you'll need a whole bunch of these lockpicks. But since you can only carry 3 at a time with the upgrade, be prepared to do a lot of backtracking to moneybags to get more and more lockpicks. Because it's like our Russian bear friend says, however, if you don't really care about these dragon eggs, you'll most likely only use about 5 to 10 lockpicks throughout your adventure. For me, I wasn't incentivized to go for all the chests and such because I didn't think whatever was in the chest was worth my time. Sure, you can get the occasional light gem from it, but they mostly just house dragon eggs. Without spoiling too much, the dragon eggs, from my perspective, are definitely not worth going after. So, to the average player like myself, the gems have limited use. As for what you actually need to progress, you have both light and dark gems. Light gems can be found all across the world in hidden locations or by doing certain missions. Most of the time you'll need them to access the professor's gadgets that transport you to the other levels so you can find and destroy the dark gems. It's these dark gems you're after because once you destroy a set amount of them with your
Horn dive.
the door to the boss of that realm will open, which upon defeating that boss, you'll be able to advance to the next realm. While progression is a lot more linear this time around, akin to Jak and Daxter or Ratchet and Clank, the action platformer design does work well here. The level design is also really straightforward, with branching paths only leading to optional dragon eggs and light gems, but again, this approach doesn't bother me. Charging around, defeating enemies, and sometimes exploring is pretty enjoyable. Not only that, but Spyro's moveset has been completely overhauled for the better. Spyro can now double jump, pole dance, jump between walls, and horn dive. These new additions also make the level design more complex and engaging. Plus, Spyro has been granted the ability to breathe a lot of new elements, like in Enter the Dragonfly, but competently. When Spyro defeats a boss, he'll either get the electricity, ice, or water breath, which are actually cleverly implemented. Sometimes you'll need the water breath to rotate wheels, and other times you'll need the electricity breath to power generators and such. Sure, you could say they're all situational, and while they kinda are, they're handled a lot better here. There are some enemies which require you to charge at them before burning them to a crisp, but with the ice breath, you can just bypass that completely and freeze kill them immediately. That, and the fact that I can breathe water on moneybags, is extremely satisfying. The latter is a memory I will cherish forever. Something I won't cherish, however, are the missions. And I guess let's begin with Spyro. Basically, the majority of Spyro's missions are turret sections, and they could not be more bland and tedious. The controls, for one thing, feel slippery, and playing them a second time for a light gem can be frustratingly challenging as there are so many enemies that come out of nowhere. Coupled with the fact that every turret section is generally identical to the one before, every time I encountered one, I would dread playing it. The other Spyro missions sections involve this ball gadget that takes obvious inspiration from wait a minute. The turret section also takes inspiration from the abundance of turret sections from other games, and the level design feels a lot like Jak and Daxter's level design, and it sort of has that Zelda feel to it. Well, I guess it's no secret that Spyro: A Hero's Tale is a hosh-posh of some of the best elements from other mainstream game series. That's probably the biggest issue I have with Spyro: A Hero's Tale. Nothing feels really innovative or original. All the gameplay elements feel overdone. Nevertheless, let's move on to the rebel animals. Arguably the, insert massive air quotes here, best part of the game. Alright, it's not that bad. Some characters like Sergeant Bird are really fun. Maybe it's because I'm a sucker for dogfighting or flight gameplay, but I genuinely enjoyed all of Sergeant Bird's levels. Think of his stages like the Speedway levels, where you have to accomplish a certain objective, such as destroying a bunch of targets or going through some archways. And most of these levels are somewhat non-linear, which can make it confusing, but it also causes the levels to be a bit more interesting. Then there's Hunter, my second favorite of the ragtag group. And his levels are kind of like Spyro's main stages, but Hunter can punch, leg slam, and shoot arrows at his foes. So usually he has to get to the end of a gauntlet or kill a certain number of enemies. Plus, you get to see Bentley along the way, which is always great in my book. See, this isn't difficult, but it can be very annoying at times. Seldomly, I would have trouble shooting, and climbing up walls is cumbersome and painfully slow. Still, I had fun playing as him, and it was a nice change of pace and scenery. Next up is Sparks, who plays kind of like an Arwing from Star Fox, and his stages are alright. Despite his controls taking a bit to get used to, Sparks is far from unplayable. Some levels do overstay their welcome though, and can be unusually hard to beat. This amount of trial and error I did whilst playing as Sparks makes his missions somewhat monotonous at times, as there are no checkpoints, and if you happen to make a couple mistakes, well, it's game over for you. Speaking of things that are monotonous, the last character is quite possibly the worst Spyro character to ever grace the series so far, Blink the Mole. Blink's levels have to be the most insufferable levels ever. As a mole, you naturally have to blow up dark gem stalactites underground. I mean, it's only plausible, and that's the first idea I would expect to be here. Also, being a mole, he has laser shooting armbands, thermal goggles, and bomb gloves. Don't get me wrong, this concept in hindsight sounds pretty cool, but it's the execution that causes these levels to suffer tremendously. Blink moves slow and can't seem to shoot while moving, so his missions are slow paced and way too long and drawn out. And if you die, you more often than not have to start over from the beginning or from the last bomb generator, which makes them even more painstakingly awful. Since you'll usually have to play these missions, and other missions for that matter, twice for the only valuable object, it gets all the more terrible. And lest we not forget about those amazing rotation style boss fights. They sure are something. Every single boss fight is Spyro going around in a circle and waiting for the boss to expose their weak point to get hit. It's simple, plain, and boring. Bosses aren't too challenging, but what really makes them get on my nerves is that after a certain amount of damage, they'll say something witty and insult Spyro, which I guess is supposed to be funny or something. It just bogs down the pace of the fight and sucks any energy you could have had towards that boss. Not only that, but just take a gander at Ursula's rejected daughter over there. She vomits for an attack and looks repulsive. At one point, she just barfs on Spyro for no reason. These fights get really bizarre, and the bosses, from a character standpoint, aren't really distinct or memorable at all. So, now that I have flooded your brain with Spyro: A Hero's Tale opinions, just how is that ending? What happens to Red and the gang? Does the world get saved? Well, if you don't want to have this thrilling ending spoiled, skip to the time on screen now. But spoiler alert, you aren't missing that much. Okay, so you've gotten to Red's lair only to discover that the professor has been kidnapped by Red and has been forced into slavery to produce Nork robots. Putting past the fact that the professor could easily refuse to do this task, why didn't he just leave when he had the chance? I mean, the door is open, and it seems like the professor does a lot more harm than good too, as shortly after Red appears, the professor makes him even more powerful. So you have to fight Red, and a generic final boss arena that's really similar to his fight in the Icy Wilderness. All you have to do is just horn dive on this target to aim his laser shooting Norks back at him, avoid projectiles, and eventually he'll be defeated. Then the professor will shrink him down and end it all with a wry quip.
Oh, no, Spyro, don't do that. He doesn't deserve to get off that easy. I'll take it from here. I'm sure I can find a good use for him in my laboratory.
I'm not sure if this is just me, but there's something about that final scene that doesn't sit well with me. The professor is going to experiment, or in other words, torture Red because of how evil he was, but he never really seemed evil to me. He wasn't developed enough for me to dislike him, and now I only feel sympathy for him. Anyways, if you've collected everything, you're treated to this ending cutscene with the Dragon Elders reconvening and saying some witty things to get that last bit of humor. It's a terrible reward, one you shouldn't feel compelled enough to go for 100% completion. Collecting dragon eggs and light gems is just not worth it. The only thing worth mentioning that you physically get from it is a slight costume change. You can play as both Flame and Ember, which do not affect the gameplay at all. It's a neat gesture, but it's one you can live without. I can see why some people may like completing collectathons for the sake of getting the full experience, but Spyro, A Hero's Tale, is not worth completing, and it's not fun to complete. Trust me when I say this, but most players will get the most enjoyment out of this title in a more casual playthrough. Overall though, I love Spyro, A Hero's Tale. Most of the time, my experience was entertaining, and although the humor is cringeworthy and the characters are flat and static, there's still a lot here to enjoy. The story is simple enough, and if you're like me, you could find yourself laughing quite a bit at the bizarre animations and character models. Not to mention the gameplay is pretty fun, and the presentation is really good. Honestly, I had the most fun playing Spyro, A Hero's Tale out of all the Spyro games. It's not objectively the best in the series, but I certainly had a blast playing as all these characters and venturing through the land of the realms. The last part of the game doesn't feel as engaging as the first half, but looking past that, Spyro, A Hero's Tale is, to me, a really enjoyable title. But like I said before, do not go for that 100% completion. Doing some of the blink levels and exploring the land tediously gets boring, and it will hamper your overall experience. Just go through the game normally and do the bare minimum if you really want to play Spyro, A Hero's Tale. But as always, if you disagree or agree with me, let me know in the comment section below. And thank you so much for watching, and take care. Have a wonderful day, and goodbye. Oh, and this little retrospective will be going on hiatus for a little while, as I'm kind of getting sick of the Spyro games. Believe it or not, playing essentially the same game over and over can be monotonous. So I'm going to be doing that again, but with a series I love more than Spyro. I hope you look forward to that, and yeah, bye.